Hey everybody, how are you today? Listen, if you are the least bit fan of science fiction or fantasy genre, but especially science fiction, and you don't watch this video to the end, you are going to kick yourself because I have something really special for you today. It is the first appearance in print of the term science fiction itself. That's right. In the June 1929 issue of Science Wonder Stories. You may have heard of the Hugo Award, which is kind of like the Pulitzer Prize for science fiction and fantasy books and achievements every year annually. Well, guess what? It is not named for Victor Hugo, as many people think. It's named for Hugo Gernsback, who was sort of a savant and an amateur radio pioneer back in the 1920s, who he owned and operated a bunch of amateur radio magazines. But he noticed that there were all these really cool stories of science and space exploration. Back in the day, people didn't really know what to call the genre yet, so they were calling it things like scientification, right? And then he decided, you know what, I'm going to put together a magazine, because I already do magazines, that are collections of these sort of stories of space travel and exploration. You know, here's one of my favorite one, Project Hail Mary. You've probably heard of the movie, but it was also a wonderful novel by Andy Weir, right? And then behind me here, I have a poster for Star Wars. What would we call this genre, you know, made popular by so many authors like Philip K. Dick and Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov, and et cetera, Kurt Vonnegut even, if it were not for this issue, right? Well, in the editorial, and if you watch through here, you're gonna flip through the magazine. I don't want to open it at this angle, and you're gonna be able to see it. Well, how did I discover this in the first place? Well, it's because of this issue of Fantasy and Science Fiction from February 1957, which has an article in it by Sam Moskowitz called How Science Fiction Got Its Name. And if you stay tuned to the next video that follows, I'm going to open up the pages and show you the very first appearance in print of the term science fiction. So hold on, here we go. This is really exciting. So, a long time ago, I bought this issue of magazine of fantasy and science fiction from February 1957 because my favorite science fiction novel of all time is called Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller. And this is the premiere of that novel. It was actually published first by Walter M. Miller as The Last Canticle as a novella. So I bought this, I was excited, and then I was flipping through it and I came to Sam Moskowitz's essay on how science fiction got its name. You can see here there's a list of different terms that were used at the time, one of them being scientific romance. And then Hugo Gernsback came along, this amateur radio enthusiast who was really interested in sort of these scientification stories and science fiction stories. And then this is great here, a careful searching of the 6-point type of the reader's letters and all issues of Amazing Stories before that date, and careful perusal of every other publication in any way connected with the publication of fantastic literature fails to reveal the use of the word science fiction anywhere, even inadvertently, before the June 1929 issue of Science Wonder Stories. Which brings us to, drum roll, the mother of all science fiction, more or less. So Gernsback, as I said, Hugo Gernsback was this radio amateur enthusiast who was the editor of a number of amateur radio rags and magazines back in the day. And he thought, well, you know what? All these stories are out there, and I think I'm going to start collecting them. So in June 1929, he started Science Wonder Stories. This is one of the only copies left in the world. And usually when you see these Golden Age or even pre-Golden Age magazines of any type, you rarely see one in this condition. You can see that the front cover is totally intact. Even more wonderful, the spine is intact, which we almost never see at something. It's almost 100 years old at this part. And the back cover, or wrap as we call it, is also in great shape. And you open it up, and of course there's foxing to the pages. That's what happens with acid and paper. That's why I keep my vintage magazines in a polyurethane wrapper. Here we get to Hugo Gernsback, Science Wonder Stories, his first editorial. And let's focus in on this. Very cool. Let's find it. No wonder then that anybody who has had any imagination at all clamors for fiction of the Jules Verne and H.G. Wells type, made immortal by them. We go a little down to the next paragraph. Science Wonder Story supplies this need for scientific fiction, which was another term that it was called, and supplies it better than any other magazine. And there we go. First time in print. I started the movement of science fiction in America in 1908 through my first magazine, Modern Electrics. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the advent of the term science fiction right here. And it goes on to say, at that time, it was an experiment. Science fiction authors were scarce. There were not a dozen worth mentioning in the entire world. And of course, there have been hundreds and thousands since then. And there you go. This is where the term, and we see one other mention here, science fiction, as published in Science Wonder Stories, is a tremendous new force in America. And it truly has been ever since. I'm glad we don't call it scientification, we call it science fiction. And this is its birthplace right here in the June 1929 issue of Science Wonder Stories. Pretty cool, huh? That is my scientification show and tell for today.